welcome to The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast, dissecting the big stories of the week with four of the sharpest editorial minds in the business, plus more on why I'm wearing this special Botswana tie later in the programme. Let's meet our esteemed guests. Erin Zaleski joining us, our Paris correspondent for the Daily Beast. Erin, great to see you. I hope you're out there. I can't see you just yet. I'm trusting our technical team that you are there. Here in the studio, hi Erin, great to see you. Catching up with you in a moment. Here in the studio, Ana Navarro Pedro, journalist and correspondent with the Portuguese press here in Paris. Great to see you too. Patrick Smith is editor-in-chief of the Africa Report. He joining us from afar too. Great to see you, Patrick. And back to the studio.
Hi.
Good evening, sir. Great to see you. And back to the studio for Matthew Dalton, Wall Street Journal reporter here in Paris. Thank you, sir, for coming in. Great to see you too.
Great to see you.
Let's begin with the events in Sudan. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary-General of the UN, has deplored what he called an epidemic of coup d'etat. His remark, of course, came after the latest one in Sudan this week. There have been protests against this military coup. More civil disobedience is planned for this weekend. Where is this going to end? Patrick, can I bring you in as editor-in-chief of the Africa Report? What's your take on the situation, sir?
Well, it's been a huge story for us, you would understand. And it's I think it's very instructive because it's got a global impact. It's not just an African story solely, because what the Sudan revolutionaries have done is they represent some sort of very specific Sudanese pushback against the global trend to authoritarianism. And what is really remarkable about the protests this week is the extent to which they've captured the imagination of the world. So you had the announcement of the coup in the early hours of Monday morning. Then you had within a day the African Union condemning the move and calling on the junta to transfer power back to the joint civil military transitional government. And that's pretty unprecedented when it comes to rapid action by the AU. Then you had yesterday the UN Security Council more or less reiterating those calls. You've got the World Bank and IMF suspending all financial support to the junta until they return to the civil military transition. So I think you've had massive international support, but also most importantly, you've got support on the ground across Sudan, not just the capital where it's Tanja, El Fasher and Darfur, and in the eastern provinces as well. So I think that makes tomorrow's demonstration, which is really a show of strength of the peaceful civilian opposition to this junta, I think makes it tremendously important. And of course, there is also a sense of dread that something could go badly wrong, given the track record of the military and some of their allied militias in the country.
Indeed, Patrick, hearing exactly what you're saying. Anna, can I bring you in to comment as well on this situation? Clearly, what happens over the next 24, 48 hours could be extremely important, to say the least, couldn't it?
Extremely important. And of course, it's admirable, this population that longs so much for democracy and for a normal functioning of institutions. But we must be realistic as well. The global and the regional interest for Sudan has some reasons. I mean, not every coup d'etat, not every military putsch has drawn as much attention and so many sanctions as this one. Sudan is a rich country: gas, gold, silver, iron, zinc, chromite. It exports a lot of gold, mainly to Gulf countries, and its geographical position makes it a geopolitical, extremely important country in Africa, just by the Red Sea, Egypt to the north, touching Libya, and then Eritrea, Ethiopia, all around it, big coast on the Red Sea. Turkey wanted to have a military base there. There was the putsch and the democratic transition government. So it was Qatar who managed to get a military base by the sea. Then Russia got another one in Port Sudan on the north, which is extremely important for Russia as well. They got the interest of the United States. Israel, good relations with Israel through United Arab Emirates. And so all the guns that used to go in the time of al-Bashir from Sudan to Hamas in Gaza Strip, it has stopped. So there are a lot of geopolitical interests that make the world look to Sudan with so much interest, and they are not all in the best interest of their population, I'm afraid.
Indeed, as is often the case, sadly, as we observe these matters worldwide. Matthew, can I bring you in there? I mean, obviously, the role that Sudan could be playing, as Anna's pointed out, is diverse and important on many fronts. Is there going to be pressure on the military junta to actually do what the people want and back off and allow Hamdok back into power?
Well, I think one of the problems that we've seen, and I think something that the Secretary-General of the UN flagged, was that the Security Council has been kind of paralyzed on a lot of these coups d'etat that have happened across, that there's been this rash of coups d'etat, as he said. You've got all these conflicting interests, China, Russia, and of course, relations on the Security Council are really difficult right now, particularly between the U.S. and Russia. So these are issues where, it's encouraging to see the Security Council, saying something about it. But I think the international community has been kind of paralyzed in that sense, and they've got a lot of coup d'etat to think about now. I mean, COVID has been really. Part of the context of this is the pandemic, and it's been really difficult for many of the economies, particularly developing world economies in Africa. Now that the West and the developed countries are unlocking, you've got also this kind of surge of inflation, which is putting additional pressure on all kinds of commodities, and that is being felt particularly severely in the developing world, and that's one of the things that was at play, I think, in this coup that made the population so angry. So it's a difficult situation, and hopefully the Security Council can come together and adopt a more unified position.
Indeed, Matthew, thank you very much. Let's bring in Erin Zaleski. Erin, we've heard a number of aspects about sort of what's happening in Sudan here, and of course the protests that are coming over the next 12, 24, 48 hours could perhaps prove to be very vital indeed. Do you feel that the people will be listened to? Do you feel that's a possibility? Do you feel that the fact that those handing out the money are now starting to actually sort of stop doing that, and maybe the junta might be forced to act on that level? What do you think will be the key thing that resolves this crisis, if indeed there is one?
Yeah, well, that's the question. And I think that's what everyone is going to be watching in the coming days. What will happen with this protest? How is the junta going to react? There's already been, unfortunately, there's been some news about protesters killed, protesters being hurt. So that doesn't look very encouraging. I think that the real big concern internationally is that if elements of the previous regime are able to take control of the country again, Sudan could emerge again as in the past it was sort of this hub of weapons smuggling and human trafficking, and it was quite removed from democracy. And so here it's made some incredible steps towards democracy, and it's sort of being seen as it's taking a step backwards. So there's definitely, I think, concern within the international community about how this is ultimately going to play out.
Erin, thank you. Final word on Sudan from Patrick. Patrick, where will it end? Patrick Smith, tell us, where do you think it will end? As you can see there, we have a sound problem with Patrick, who it's a shame because obviously he's got lots to say on this matter. We'll try and get back to him in a moment. Let's move on to our next topic, that of COP26. Is this the beginning of the end of the world as we know it, is what some people are saying? COP26 gets underway this weekend. There will be some notable absentees, including China. But the US will be there. And Green campaigners warn the time for action is long overdue. Anna, the time for action is long overdue. Greta Thunberg's been saying this for a long time.
She's been saying it has been 30 years of blah, 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 right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
young
Build back better,
Swedish
she says,
activist.
yeah, as if, Karen, yeah.
Well, but apparently it's a turning point because it's supposed to see if the countries who had, for the first time in Paris in 2015, agreed on certain targets, on certain objectives, to see if they have respected those nationally determined commitments, and if they are going to adjust them in order for us not to boil down or freeze up, I don't know, in the future, or the generations that will come after us, actually. So, yes, they say it's a turning point, but can anyone believe that politicians with a short term calendar of elections will be willing to endure dissatisfaction with the electors, with citizens, in order to save the planet?
Well,
big question in Glasgow.
Didn't Emmanuel Macron try to put up the price of diesel fuel to stop people using diesel fuel? And look what happened. It triggered a whole range of protests called the Yellow Vest, didn't it?
There are many things behind that came up afterwards.
Indeed, wasn't that, but one of the main factors. Erin, can I bring you in on this one in terms of the end of the world as we know it coming up? Do you feel that sense of gloom that many people do feel right now regarding the climate?
Well, I mean, you could argue that it's alarmist, but I think there is a good reason to be alarmed. I mean, the damage has been done. I don't know if you've read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, the IPCC, that was released in August, and it's absolutely terrifying. I think the difference here is that we're finally seeing some actual tangible impacts of climate change. 2 or 3 decades ago, it was more of an abstraction, but now we're actually seeing the result of it. We're seeing, devastating wildfires. I was actually in California in August and had to move away from where I was visiting in Lake Tahoe because of the danger of the fire. We see floods in Germany. There was fires in Greece. Venice suffered the second worst flood in its history in November 2019, excuse me. And then just today, I read that the Dutch Weather Institute, the KNMI, has warned that the sea levels in the Netherlands are rising at a much faster rate than was initially anticipated. So there's this confluence of disasters around the world, and I think people are finally starting to pay attention.
Is Anna right when she says, Erin, that politicians just basically are too short-termist to actually appreciate and do something that will affect the kind of change that's needed?
I think up to this point that's accurate. And hopefully, as I mentioned, hopefully now that there's no longer any denying it. I mean, there's been scientific proof about what's happening and people are seeing the results of what's occurring. Hopefully that will be enough to force some action. But I mean, again, it's up to this point, I feel like it's been insufficient.
Erin, thank you. Matthew, can I bring you in on this one? I mean, clearly there are financial matters at play of this one as well, of course. Will those issues prove to be more influential, perhaps, than anything any politician has to say? Is there a financial aspect at play which actually says more about what needs to be done and what will be done?
Well, I think the kind of the economic forces behind climate change are really interesting right now because you've had a sharp fall in the cost of renewable energy over the last few years. So the price of solar panels have come way down, wind power. Both of those options are now in many markets cheaper than coal-fired electricity. And so that's a really important thing to note because when you look at climate negotiations previously in previous years, what countries were trying to do is say, okay, we know the cheapest way to get power is from fossil fuels, and yet we need to do this thing which is more expensive, which is renewable energy. But now, the cheapest way is often renewable energy. Now adopting renewable energy more widely has a lot of other complications with it in terms of the wind is not always blowing, the sun is not always shining, so you have to deal with those things, and technology, I think, is beginning to address that. But that fundamental shift where the economics are now really moving in favor of renewable energy is a very important development, a very hopeful development. I don't think that sort of aspect of the debate gets enough attention, but particularly when developed countries are going to be talking about spending trillions of dollars for developing nations, that's one of the things that is going to be negotiated at the COP to move them onto a lower carbon development pathway. that lower carbon development pathway has become much more feasible, much less expensive than it was just a few years ago. That's a hopeful sign.
That's a hopeful sign. I'm thinking about the issue of, say, sort of on a consumer level in Europe, for instance. Gavin Newsom from the US, the California governor, is taking the whole plan of his program for electric cars to the COP26 to talk about that, to say, look, this is a great idea, it really works. But if you're a consumer and you're going to go from having, your diesel car or whatever to an electric car, there's quite a price hike, isn't there? And that's clearly something that's going to be an ongoing problem.
I think that price hike, that price differential is going to narrow, I think, very, very quickly in the coming years. And all these technologies, I mean, the economics are all going to become much more favorable. And of course, governments have a crucial role to play there, because when they put the rules in place, they give companies the kind of certainty to really go full force in developing those kinds of technologies, to bring down the cost, to get scale. All of those things are really important. And so it just makes it doubly important to get the right public policies in place to bring the costs down.
Thank you, Matt. Let's get a final comment on this from Patrick from the Africa Report. Patrick, I hope we can now hear you, because I know you've got loads of interesting things to say. The Malawian president was talking to France 24 earlier this week, saying that climate change is key to the future of his country. I'm just back from Botswana, where there are loads and loads of wildfires. Clearly, this is a big issue for Africa, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the African line is a very clear one, that Africa has suffered more from global warming than any other continent on the planet, as witnessed by the extreme weather conditions, the floods, the fires, and the periodic droughts in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. But it's contributed less than any other continent to global warming. It's less than 3% of global emissions at the moment. But I think that does point to a much bigger question, which is beyond really whether electric cars are cheap or expensive or anything else, which is access to power. Less than 50% of Africa has access to electricity. Everybody wants electricity to develop their economies. It's absolutely essential. Right now, it's the big economies of the present and the future, India and China, generate most of their power through coal, and that's not going to change overnight. Africa wants a reason to do it differently. But right now, the cost of renewables, the project finance for renewables, as an alternative to coal and other fossil fuels like the gas and oil, just aren't there. So until and unless this summit can come up with a really viable path to generate energy for developing economies, alternative energy, we're not really going to make much of a dent in those horrendous pictures of temperature rising that we saw with the Intergovernmental Report in August. So I think that's the core thing. The other thing is the availability of finance for those countries that are trying to make that energy transition. And that's been fought over long and hard. And while Germany has done its great guns, so have the Scandinavian countries. France has paid most of its share. Britain, weirdly enough, as the host of this summit with the UN, hasn't paid. I think it's paid about 55% of its share. The United States of America has paid about 20% of its share. So the big industrial countries still have a lot of catching up to do in terms of financing and walking the walk on their perspectives for this energy transition, I think.
Hearing exactly what you're saying there, Patrick. Thank you very much indeed, Patrick Smith. Rounding up this little section regarding COP26, we, of course, will be bringing all developments on that as it happens. Let's remind you now, before we continue with the world this week, of the main world news headlines here, live from Paris. Welcome back to The World This Week. We've been discussing COP26. Before we move on to our next one, let's bring Anna in for a final comment, I think, on COP26. Or any of our other guests, of course, are all here to give us their points of view. Anna, we heard Patrick say that this is the most important issue in Africa. Of course, it's important for everybody, isn't it? Everybody needs to take notice. Everybody needs to act.
Yeah, and I was listening to what everybody said. I was thinking about my own country, Portugal, where we had the intention of having electricity produced by alternative energy, like 50% by 2030. And it's over 60, 70% now. Actually, authorities and the national company are studying, which is not national because it was privatized and is Chinese now, but that's another story. Actually, they are studying the right mix of alternative energies and some fossil energy in order to see how the costs go. Because the thing is about the costs are going down, but there is a certain investment at point T, and sometimes you progress in technology is so fast that you don't have time to amortir.
To slow it down.
Right. And so we are studying that mix. But I don't know where we are in our objectives for the COP26. That I'm sorry.
Indeed, it's one of these things, I think, as Patrick was saying, everybody needs to sort of make some kind of big effort to make it all happen.
Yeah.
Let's move on. The Brexit fishing rounds where we go next. Ahoy there, we might say. The face-off over fishing licences in the wake of Brexit as France and Britain very much at loggerheads. Loggerheads is an actual place in North Wales. Did you know that?
I had no idea.
It's an actual place, and it's called Loggerheads.
That's where it comes from.
Imagine going for a beer in Loggerheads. What a great place to be. Anyway, so loggerheads between France and Britain. The issue, of course, has seen an ambassador summoned, a trawler forced into port in Le Havre and put under arrest. Yes, it does happen. And the Granville fishing fleet on the Cherbourg Peninsula confined to harbour. This situation, Johnson meeting Macron in the corridors of the G20. I wonder if anything will be resolved. Erin, can I bring you in on this one? Where do you see this fishy tale ending?
Oh my gosh, I'm not sure. I'm really waiting to. I think the deadline is on Tuesday. It's the 2nd, isn't it? I think basically this really comes down to politics and bureaucracy. I think that there's a certain lingering resentment in the UK regarding the Brexit deal that maintained the French fishing access, but now there's all these issues about of who gets to, which French fishermen are going to get, receive licenses. It's this big bureaucratic entanglement. Apparently, they try to quick summary. Basically, under the agreement, French fishermen who've been fishing in the waters, in the British waters from the beginning, still have a right to continue to do so as long as they can prove that they've been doing so this whole time. So I think for the next few years, they have a right to do this. But they have to apply for licenses. And apparently that's where the snafu has started. The British are denying a lot of these licenses.
Indeed, and that snafu, we've reported on it here at France 24 about how it's affecting the fishing fleets at Granville, just on the west side there of the Cherbourg Peninsula. Patrick, sorry, go ahead, Erin. Go ahead, finish, please.
We're just going to quickly jump into Macron. I think the tough rhetoric on the part of Macron is also political because he had a lot of support from fishing communities during the 2017 election. He told them that he would support them during the Brexit negotiations, and he would always have their backs, so to speak. So I think, and we have another election on the horizon in a few months. And I think that this tough stance by Macron, there's threats from the right right now, and I think that he's trying to sort of shore up this crucial vote.
Indeed, the fishing crews are actually sort of very much a political pawn on both sides of the issue, weren't they? Because obviously Boris Johnson and the Brexit crew were very much talking about the fact that they had sort of the British fishing crews first and foremost in their minds. And Patrick, can I bring you in to maybe give us some insight on this one as to where you see this going? Because when you have Boris Johnson, who is making sort of, adverts, eating fish and chips and sort of sending a message there about eating fish and about seafood and obviously about his own political aims, the language between Johnson and Macron might be quite interesting when they meet, might it not?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you in the sense that that both the British government and the French government are trying to instrumentalize this for their own political gain. You mentioned, Macron is in full campaign mode ahead of next April's presidentials. The reality with Boris Johnson's government that it's in permanent campaign mode. Everything it does is a sort of campaigning promise. And or trying to justify the promises it made and hasn't yet lived up to in the last election. And absolutely front and center still, although no one really talks about Brexit per se in British politics, is the notion that Brexit would fail. And everything Johnson's government's trying to do is to sort of disparage that notion and say it's been this roaring success. And the reason why we've got these economic problems and supply chain problems and labor problems in Britain, nothing to do with Brexit, of course, it's all to do with a pandemic. And if there is anything apart from the pandemic causing it, it's obstreperous countries in the European Union. So, the fishing dispute with Britain fits in beautifully into that narrative. So, they've kind of confected this fishing war. Those of you, and I don't think there's anyone as old as me on the panel, remember there was a war with Iceland over fishing rights, and that was about 40 years ago. Between Britain and Iceland, and then it was instrumentalized for political gain. So I think this is essentially what's going on here. I think Macron and Johnson may have a glass of vin rouge together and have a quiet chuckle about it and say, well, yeah, let's try and come up with a public statement that'll sort of cool things down a bit and say that we've fixed it and we'll both look better as a result.
My producer Mohammed suggesting they might sit down over a fish supper and discuss it, which would be quite ironic, wouldn't it? And Patrick, I am old enough to remember that dispute with Iceland that you're talking about. So I think you and I must be of the same vintage, or at least a similar vintage, sir. Great. Anna, you were obviously nodding away with what Patrick was saying there, especially when he used the word obstreperous about certain European nations.
Course.
Because obviously, as far as Britain's concerned, it's always someone else's fault.
Because fisheries in the. One of the main things, as Patrick said, was during the Brexit campaign was we are going to have our fishermen, our fisheries industry, really being independent. You can fish all the fish you want. You can export all you want, everything. Yep. But they are going bankrupt because exports are difficult. They fish the fish they don't eat in United Kingdom, so they used to export it to Europe. They are having trouble with the Norwegian fisheries as well, and big companies. And yes, of course. So this is going to be absolutely a blessing for the government, Boris Johnson, because it's not us, it's not Brexit, it's those frogs over there. They always have been doing this to us. And Macron is still mulling over the submarine deal that went to the United States and partly to the United Kingdom. And if he can, because it is character, you're a French president, if he can squash down Boris Johnson, he will. I don't think they will drink red wine together, Patrick. I'm sorry. I think Macron will want to go for the fight.
Yeah, relations between the UK and France right now are just, terrible. You look at the rhetoric that's going on over this issue. It's like the French minister said, this is combat. The French government spokesman said, that the UK is wiping its feet on the Brexit agreement. And then, after the whole submarine affair, Boris Johnson said, donnez-moi un break.
Donnez-moi un break.
It's just that this is devolving into some pretty childish and funny and sort of alarming rhetoric between the two countries.
I'm just wondering how long the people in the UK will be fooled by this, because surely at some point they've got to wake up and think, hang on, this shortage in the supermarkets, we can't get petrol, we can't get this, we can't get that. We used to get it all before. Who's to blame? Will people eventually wake up, don't they?
Well, I think there is some merit to the argument that the pandemic has something to do with all of these things.
Point taken.
And
point
that is
taken.
true.
Point taken.
It does have something. It's not all Brexit. But there's a lot of things that are Brexit related, and in particular, it's not just the primary essentials shortages that are the problem. Is the labor problem that is the shortage.
All the lorry drivers that have gone back to the EU, for instance.
Yeah, you depend so heavily on migrant labor from the rest of the EU. Those people go away. It was not it's not rocket science to figure out that there was going to be a problem there. And of course, they totally swept all those concerns under the rug. That was sort of they thought that this was going to be a miraculous rebirth of the British labor market, and maybe wages will be rising in the British market to kind of draw people back into these professions, but it hasn't happened yet. And in the meantime, there are these severe shortages.
Indeed, Matthew, thank you very much indeed. Let's turn to the clash of cultures over colonial times. France has agreed to hand back a catalogue of artefacts snatched from Benin back in the 1890s. These artefacts are, as we speak, being carefully wrapped up to transport them back to West Africa this weekend. They've been on show at the Quai Branly Museum, which, Anna, I imagine, may see its shelves become almost as empty as a British supermarket.
Not yet. Of course, Benin and other countries are saying that you have so many artifacts that you took during colonial times, you have to give them back all, but it's far from that in France. Germany seems to be more on the path of restitution of artifacts, but it's not the same colonial past neither. It's more through illegitimate, let's say, acquisition. Great Britain, let's not talk about them.
Oh, let's talk about Great Britain. I'll be accused of ducking it. I wouldn't
Greece
duck
asks
that.
for the Parthenon marbles. Boris Johnson says, no way. It was acquired in a very honest way.
The Elgin marbles, as we call them in the UK, yeah? The Elgin marbles, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We in
Elgin
Europe,
took them.
we call it a Parthenon. But I mean, Portugal, very strong colonial past, thousands of, tens of thousands of artifacts as well. Angola, former Portuguese colony, has been asking for them, and they've been saying, well, we didn't go on a pillage. Actually, it were donations. Yeah, okay, but how did those people donate it? How did they acquire them? There is a little... So there is a long time to go before Musée du Quai Branly will have their shelves.
Indeed. And of course, some of the things there are acquired, in a justifiable way, and they will be staying. But as you say, I think a lot of things will be going back. Patrick, can I have a Pan-African view from you, sir? Patrick Smith.
Yeah, I think on this one, you've got to give it to Macron for being somewhat prescient on the issue. I mean, African organizations and universities and museums and so on have been calling for the restitution of these objets d'art for decades. But it was that committee that Macron set up in 2017 that investigated the issue, then reported a year later, and now they're actually delivering, which is, I think it deserves some credit. It's not nearly enough, as many African governments would say, but it contrasts quite sharply with the official position in countries such as Britain, such as Germany and the United States. What is kind of remarkable about the another Benin, I mean, the Benin in Nigeria, which is totally separate from Republic of Benin, the Francophone state west of Nigeria. The Republic of the Benin bronzes that come from Benin in Nigeria, there are literally tens of thousands of those dotted around the world. And they were all looted by the British at the end of the 19th century. This was pure piracy. There was no question of anyone negotiating anything. They went in with an overwhelming armed force and took everything of value. And weirdly enough, they became this celebrated artifact exhibition within 10 years in the British Museum in the early 20th century. And they've stayed, a lot of them have stayed there. A lot were then sold to private collectors. And the private collectors, presumably out of pressure on their consciences, many of them have restored them privately to Nigeria. So now the plan in Nigeria is to build a couple of big museums, one by the Ghanaian architect David Adjaye, to house these bronzes. So they now have a plan to display them, to look after them, and to restore that. And I think that's part of the narrative. The other bit of it really got a boost during the Black Lives Matter campaign in 2020, as the pandemic was soaring around the world. The people were focusing on this issue and of changing the historical narrative, not just around the theft of artifacts, but around the whole colonial, the morality and the ethics of what happened in the colonial period. So I think it's a tremendously important step, the restitution of these artifacts. both for the cultural beauty that it restores to Africa and other parts around the world, including Greece if they get the Elgin marbles back, but also for demonstrating what was going on in history and starting this conversation and debate about the rights and wrongs of what was going on in over the last 2 or 3 centuries.
Indeed, Patrick. Indeed, my kids, when I took them to Cape Bromley, said, "What are all these things doing here? Why aren't they in Africa?" I think that probably sums it all up. The change of mindset completely there. Now, before we end this program, let me get back to my tie, the story behind this. The national colours of Botswana. I was there last week, coaching and advising the presenters on the Botswana national TV channel. Young reporters coming through. It made me think about, the good things about giving something back. Let's take a little look at a report by Keba Moletsi.
Kenano Mupi is looking to use stand-ups or pieces to camera to enhance her day-to-day television news reports.
I learned that you need to be confident, you need to come natural, you need to measure what's happening in the background together with the whole story.
News anchors Lynette Habana and Angela Mdlalani also hope to up their on-screen mettle.
He taught us a lot, starting from just simple reading and clarity in your way you deliver the news.
As a new presenter, I've learned new techniques. I've gained a bit of skill on how to improve on my presenting going forward.
The training, conducted by veteran journalist and presenter Mark Owen of France 24, helped a great deal in unleashing Botswana television's potential. Such refresher courses are said to be vital, especially at an era where citizen journalism is threatening traditional media. BTV and France 24's partnership cements on the already existing diplomatic relations between Botswana and France. I and my colleagues are among the 100 Botswana television reporters and presenters that have trained with France 24 since 2018. Botswana Television, Gaborone.
Kevin Maklosi, one of my star pupils last week, they're reporting from Gaborone, the capital of Botswana. Wonderful country, wonderful people, and I was proud to be there representing this channel as part of our arrangement training the journalists there. And I'm just asking you guys, I felt great giving something back. Erin, I'll start with you. What's the importance of being able to give something back, especially in a profession like ours?
Oh, I think it's crucial. I mean, especially there's so many parts of the world that have had limited press freedom, and things are starting to change in a positive direction. And if there's an opportunity to mentor young, talented journalists who are passionate about the field, I'd say the more people doing it, the better.
They're all watching, they're all listening to your words, Erin. Thank you very much indeed. Matthew, your thoughts?
I commend you for doing that.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
I think it's obviously a developed and well-functioning media is essential for any democracy. So kudos to you for going down there and for, I think a lot of democracies in Africa are fragile. So it's great. It's really necessary to get, journalists trained and understanding what it means to be an objective journalist.
Indeed, it was great. They're asking the right questions to Anna.
I see French diplomacy still has many strings.
Indeed, because there is part of that too. There is obviously a sort of a soft power aspect to it.
But it does seem to have been very profitable to everyone.
Indeed, it was great fun. Patrick, over to you. Final word from you, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, journalism is sometimes it feels a bit like a self-indulgent job, running around the world, running up the stories you want. So it is a great opportunity when, you can teach a bunch of young journalists or try to tell them how you got to get on the stories. I think it's great and satisfying for them, hopefully useful for them, and I think it's satisfying for the person that does it.
Patrick Smith, it was certainly satisfying for me, sir. Thank you for being on the programme. Always great to see you. Patrick Smith, Editor-in-Chief of the Africa Report. Thank you to Erin Zaleski, Paris correspondent of the Daily Beast. Thanks to Ana Navarro-Pedro of the Portuguese press here in Paris. Thank you for joining us. And across the studio, thanks to Matthew Dalton of the Wall Street Journal, based here in Paris too. Thank you very much indeed. A big hello to everybody in Botswana. Thank you for being wonderful over the past 2 weeks. Keep up the good work. And do stay with us all here on France 24.